Welcome to the Trust Us, We're Professionals podcast with your friends from SSC, CPAs, and advisors. This is the podcast where we break down financial matters found in pop culture, the national conversation for the general public. I am your host, Chris Underwood, a licensed financial advisor with SSC Wealth, and I am thrilled to be joined today by the lovely Michelle Hammond and Tim Metz.
Does Tim not get an adjective? Because I'm lovely. Or is that an adverb?
Not so lovely.
The not so lovely.
Yeah.
Yes.
There are not enough adjectives in the dictionary to describe Mr. Metz.
Not that PJ won't have to bleep.
Yeah. Touche. For today's episode, we are going to discuss Britney Spears. Now, in all seriousness, we've all heard about Britney Spears and her conservatorship issues, especially in the recent news. Certainly been a high-profile event that really didn't need to be or should have been. And I don't want to dive into the back and forth of what's been happening here in the Spears matter. I will say briefly that I think Michelle, Tim, and I will agree that it saddens all of us that it's taking place so publicly. The whole matter is really personal, confidential, private, whatever you want to call it, but it's really no one's business and certainly isn't the media's business. And I know we're doing a podcast episode on it, but all kidding aside, we aren't here today to talk about the personal issues surrounding her conservatorship, but really about what a conservatorship, if I can pronounce it, conservatorship is and why they can be necessary. So, with that being said, what exactly is a conservatorship?
I think first that we'll have to teach Underwood how to pronounce it
How
before
is it
we
pronounced?
explain it to everybody.
I think before I answer that question, though, and I know this is a serious topic, but I really want to know why all the flies in here are like hovering over Underwood.
Well, maybe maybe they're in a legal predicament and they need some advice.
I don't know, but they like you. So,
Are you trying to say I smell like
well,
I think
I
they
don't know.
could smell the shit on where you said it's not something we should talk about in the media, but we're going to do a podcast on it.
Yeah.
No, I think, we're doing this, guys, because this is a real thing. This thing happens a lot. Britney's happens to be playing out in the national media. And conservatorships, trustees, guardians, and we kind of want to break down what it really means and what it looks like and what it could mean to you as you age and your parents age and things change.
Yeah.
So, Tim, what in the hell is a conservatorship?
Well, that's a good question. It changes from state to state, but I'll start off by saying that in most conservatorships, they're a vehicle of a state law, and so they can be different from place to place. But Kansas, we're really lucky because it's one of the things we do in kind of a common sense, ordinary fashion. But the long and short of what a conservatorship is it's just a tool, and it's a tool to have somebody appointed to manage your assets, to manage your things, not your health per se, but your things. And typically in Kansas, they're appointed for in a variety of situations. But what we're looking for here, it's defined by statute, and I don't want to get into the boring details of all that, but it's a statutory beast, and it's a legal relationship. It's one that's created by a court. You don't create a conservatorship without the involvement of a judge. And, it comes about in a situation where somebody's just unable to handle their affairs for whatever reason. Now, in Kansas, we have a test that we use, and it's kind of a two-part test. First off, the person has to be impaired. So there's got to be some sort of decision that, by somebody that you can't handle that you don't have your marbles in the jar and you can't handle it. And so once you've been determined to be impaired, the next thing they're going to look at is there no other alternative? I mean, this is really, in my opinion, although I say this, they're not always kind of the worst case scenario. I mean, they're used all the time, prospectively too. And so, but a lot of cases when conservatorships are established, they happen because somebody's in a bind and they need help and they just can't manage their affairs. So, what do conservators do? They typically manage bank accounts, they manage investments, They can manage your other assets. They'll pay your bills. They can do all sorts of things like that for you. So it's really, I guess you could kind of equate it to, it's like your personal business manager.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I'm assuming then there's got to be different types.
There are. I think it depends on the circumstances in which they arise, and and that's the nice thing about, especially in Kansas, but in other areas, conservatorships they're an agreement, they're an arrangement, and so they can be tailored to fit the circumstances, and they can be limited, they can be temporary, or they can be full, and I we don't really script these things out, so I end up flying by the seat of my tail, but one of these particular kinds I do remember an example of, and that would be like a temporary, and we see those a lot. Somebody has a stroke, somebody falls, they hit their head, and they've got a long convalescence ahead of them, and they have a complete inability in the moment to handle their affairs. And those are perfect examples where you find a temporary conservatorship established. Joni Mitchell is a prime example. Since we're talking about pop culture, Joni Mitchell had a stroke a few years ago, and in fact, she had to have a conservator appointed to manage her affairs, and a guardian as well. And we'll talk about guardians later because these really go hand in hand. But in fact, Joni Mitchell's conservatorship was so successful that she actually petitioned the court to have this person become her permanent conservator because she felt like they really took good care of her, and she felt comfortable trusting her assets and her affairs to this person. So, there's that's kind of the, I'd call that conservatorship light. It's kind of a surgical intervention. It comes in, it does its job, and then it's over. But you can have limited ones. Not all forms of disability or inability, whatever you want to call it, are created equal. And so, sometimes people need help with all of their affairs. Sometimes people just need help with parts of their affairs. In Lawrence, we have great organizations that help developmentally disabled folks live independently. And, they have the ability, for example, to, manage $500 in their checking account on a monthly basis, but perhaps their family left them a bunch of money. They absolutely have no ability to manage investments. And so you can have what's called a limited conservatorship. And it's kind of a partial conservatorship. It handles one specific item. And then the last and what we've heard about, in the Britney Spears situation, and what a lot of them are full conservatorships. And that's where you have total control and you're managing all of their assets.
But she also has, and like I said, we're not going to go too much into Britney's specific case, just out of respect to her and her privacy, but she has a personal and a financial.
Yes, she does. And that's not unusual. You can have both. They can be one and the same. It depends. And it also depends on the state. For example, if I remember right, and of course, this is not legal advice. I'm not a licensed California attorney, but I think California is one of the jurisdictions where they appoint a conservator for the assets, and they appoint a conservator, which we would call here in Kansas a guardian of the person. And that person handles all of the healthcare and medical decisions. And I think in specifically in the Spears case, the difference is that guardian of the person was established at a later point in time. But for the longest time, her dad did it all.
It would seem wise, though, right, to kind of not give one person too much power if it is a full, like they're overseeing finances and personal decisions, just to split it up so it's not all your eggs in one basket, right?
Yeah, that's
Case
actually an
by
excellent
case.
question.
Yeah, I'm case by case.
Yeah, case by case. That's a great question, though, because a lot of these situations that we see involve family members.
Mhm.
Okay, and if I'm injured or I'm incapacitated, I have a choice. Who do I want taking care of my assets? Well, I want somebody taking care of my assets who knows exactly what they're doing. But I might want my son or my wife or some other family member taking care of me. Yeah. But none of those people have any concept of how to manage investments or assets or anything like that, at least right now.
I won't let Owen manage your investments, Tim.
I wouldn't either because he, I mean, I came home last night. He had like a 6-foot long Nerf gun he just bought. He was like, "Look at this, Dad!" And he shot me with 10 bullets. It's like,
Owen and
no.
I would have a bitching Nerf gun war if
Oh.
we took over your finances. It would be.
I live in
It
a
would be
pacifist house, and my child has more firearms than the military.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Anyway,
you got to make sure that Elise isn't my financial. Today, I gave her a credit card, my credit card, so that she could go downtown and get some drinks with her friends. I had no cash. Okay, she's 14. These are coffee drinks. And she texted me because she was super proud. Super proud. She gave a 15% tip. And I was like, "That's perfect, honey." She's like, "It was $9. I gave him a 15% tip." So that's perfect, honey. I'm glad you did that. She's like, "I forgot. I didn't put the percentage on there, but I wrote 15." I was like, "Hey, sis. So we're gonna do a little something tonight where she doesn't pay $24 for 2 drinks downtown Mass. She has to be a favorite now."
I just thought that's what coffee cost these days. I mean, Starbucks has gone so expensive. I'm like, if I'm paying $12 for something, it better have some alcohol in it.
Yeah, she said they were really good, and I was like, they should be good drinks for $24. So
yeah.
that worked out well. So again, perfect reason to split. I
Yeah.
would let her make my medical decisions, but absolutely not calculate tips for me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm just worried I'm going to go into the hospital with a broken pinky, and Julie's going to be like, "Yeah, pull the plug.
Yeah.
It's time."
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
Julie and I already wrote that.
All right. All kidding aside, excuse me. Let's talk about who needs
Yeah.
a conservatorship. So I kind of got it that time.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, that's a funny question. Who needs a conservatorship? Well, most people really don't want to need a conservatorship. It's kind of like saying, "Do you need a casket?" It's like, I don't think so, right?
Someday you may.
Well,
You
may.
will actually.
No,
It
no,
says,
no.
"Oh, I know we have urns." and stuff.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's like burn me and shoot me out of a cannon, please.
Mhm.
But
Very Hunter Thompson of you.
I'm gonna
Yes.
pack him actually into a firework. I think is what we.
I
talked
hope
about.
so,
It'll be
yeah.
a big firework.
I just want to be taxidermied.
oh, we don't.
You know what?
No.
Put me in the office in the corner.
No, absolutely not.
I'm
Oh.
your financial advisor.
Yeah.
Let's ask stuffed Chris Underwood.
That question.
What you typically see, though, I mean, most conservatorships fall into 3 categories, 3 kind of groups of people. And obviously with our aging demographic, it's kind of changing. But, in the early days and what I saw a lot of when I practiced law were minors. And it would be in that situation where both parents were deceased, or one parent was out of the picture. You couldn't locate them, and the caretaking parent, custodial parent, died. And in almost all of those cases, what comes about is that there's been no estate planning, and so you've just got this child out there, and maybe the parent had a life insurance policy or actually had some assets. You don't know. I mean, in today's day and age, and so what do you do? Well, you're not going to make them a ward of the state because they've got assets, and so oftentimes what'll happen in that case is the court will appoint a conservator, and they'll appoint a guardian, a separate person, to manage their, like a child psychologist to manage their personal, their mental affairs and that sort of thing. That used to be kind of the standard of what you saw, but today we see an incredible number of what I would call, just basically incapacitated seniors, folks that maybe they didn't do estate planning, or they weren't thinking about estate planning, and then suddenly they didn't have capacity. Dementia can be really insidious, and so you can be going along one day, and 3 days later, go off that cliff, and you don't have capacity anymore, so that you can't execute estate planning documents. And so we see that a lot, and we're going to see a whole lot more. So this is my plug: get your estate plan done, because and we'll talk about that here later. It really figures into this process. It's important, but we see a lot of that, and I think kind of coming up on the tail of that would be what I was talking about earlier with folks that have they're developmentally disabled. So they have various issues, and that's a great. I've seen this many times where I have a close friend, and he has a son who has Down syndrome, and so when his son turned 16, they went to an estate planning attorney, And they started the process of having a conservatorship established for him because once he's 18, he's emancipated. And so, there's a clear delineation of who has the right to give him care. And so where we often see these developmentally disabled cases are folks that are taking care of children that, were born that way, and they're now reaching maturity and majority or legal capacity. And so they'll establish a conservatorship because at the end of the day, if it's set up right, the conservatorship will actually outsurvive the parents. That's the point of it.
Which is different than power of attorney, which goes when the person passes away.
That's right. I think that's an important thing that a lot of people don't realize. I know that I can count on more than two hands the times that people would come into the bank and they would want to manage assets and affairs for somebody that had died using a durable power of attorney. And you'd have to say, sorry, it's no longer applicable. Now you have to probate what's there. So it's important to note that it has limitations. I mean, it stops when you stop.
Yeah. Can I ask a little bit about the back end of the mechanism of this, like who's watching who? Because that's part of the issue with Britney Spears is that it's sort of like there hasn't been any checks and balances this whole time. So is it just a judge? I mean, do they have to submit monthly reports, or what does that look like?
When you're a conservator, and I've worked on several of these through my career, you have to provide an immense amount of accounting to the court. And you provide annual accountings.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes you provide monthly accountings, and they're very detailed. All the ins and outs, all of the discussions that have taken place. I mean, you're creating a record for the care because you've got to prove what you did. And there's this kind of continuing burden on a conservator to always prove that what they're doing is in the best interest of their ward. And that's what we call the person, their ward of the conservatorship.
Okay. So guardianship, highlighted the difference of that. We touched on power of attorney, but just in really simplistic terms, can you elaborate more on the difference between that, POA, and a conservatorship?
Sure. I mean, I have, written up in the past, that you can look at powers of attorney and trusts and those things, those sorts of tools as ways to avoid conservatorships and guardianships. And I should say they don't necessarily completely help you avoid them if you need one, but they allow you to control the process a little bit more. And so, a power of attorney is a document that you create, hopefully with the assistance of a good lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
And, you can have a couple of kinds of powers of attorney and they almost mirror what we see in the conservatorship guardianship world. And you can have a regular durable power of attorney. And in that document, you can specify the range of your business affairs that someone else that you appoint as your attorney in fact to manage. And that can be a family member, that could be, an investment advisor. It could be a commercial bank trust department, but you can specify that and you can actually put specific restrictions on when it comes into effect. Okay, so you could state that it comes into effect upon your incapacity, or you could even state that it comes into effect at a certain age. I mean, it gives you control. It gives you control over when it happens, what it pertains to, and who does it, who's your representative. And so that's part of it. And then the other side, which is more like the guardianship side, would be the durable power of attorney for healthcare decisions. And if you don't have one, everybody should at a minimum have one of these, because this is an instrument that gives somebody that you trust the care over your person if you become incapacitated. And the classic case for having a durable power of attorney for a healthcare decision is when somebody is severely injured in a car wreck and, they're in an emergency room and there's absolutely, nobody to make decisions. If you flash that document to the hospital, you can immediately step into their place and start making decisions for them. It's, I think, even more critical than a will, because a will means you have assets and you might not have assets, but your health is an asset and your physical autonomy is an asset. So durable power of attorney is the number one critical document, at least as it relates to healthcare decisions, that you should have.
Would it suffice? Many states will accept a handwritten will they'll accept it. Not every state, but many states. Could I do just something simple as like, if I become medically incapacitated, don't trust Julie or Michelle, find someone else to make my medical decisions?
That's a good question. I've never
Lots
really...
of good questions for me today.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm glad I had,
Whew.
Cheerios this morning for
The
breakfast.
first for everything. I mean, I bet it varies state by state, Chris.
Yeah.
That I'd hate
It
to give
does.
advice on that and know that in Nebraska they want them in triplicate in Times New Roman or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I would take the time to do it the
Do it
right
the right
way.
way.
And,
Yeah, there's statutory requirements to those things. Like they all have to be notarized, and
Yeah.
and so just writing something out at the last second and not following kind of the statutory formalities is probably not a good idea. I don't think I would go that route. I think I would actually download a form off the internet before I'd handwrite one. But I don't think that's a good option either. So
Okay, then I withdraw the question. Let's move on.
people were thinking it.
Yes,
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 yes.
That's my role here, is to speak for the audience. Could a conservator have unlimited power to, while someone is living, to say this person gets X, this person gets Y, this person gets Z?
no, I mean, that's a loaded question. In terms of like, notice I didn't give you I didn't say that's a great
It's
question.
not
So
a
it's a
good
loaded
question. It's loaded.
That's basically sounds a lot like estate planning.
yeah.
And I think that that's more of a challenge to pull off through a conservatorship, because then you're substituting some judgment beyond the physicality of the person you're dealing with, and you're trying to guess who they would give things to. There's no substitute for a will. There's no substitute for a trust. Those two documents. Now, could a conservator hire an attorney to prepare a trust instrument and at least seek general consultation from their ward as to what they would like to see done, and have that ward, have that information put into a trust document, and then have the conservator be the signer of that I suppose that's a possibility. I think that's an interesting question.
Well, we're talking about trust, or you mentioned trust. Let's talk about revocable trusts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the other way, now a revocable trust is a way that you can at least manage the asset side of things, and that can go on past your death. And so, we typically see, wills and trusts and durable power of attorney for healthcare decisions all kind of work together. They're like three legs of a stool, and of your estate plan. And so, the trust, what the trust really is going to deal with what I would call the conservatorship side of things. It's your assets and how those assets are going to be managed, and then upon your death, how they're going to be distributed. A lot like a will, but they don't have to go to probate court. So there's a lot less formality. It's a private arrangement. It doesn't become a public record unless there's litigation involved. And so, most folks with assets tend to go the route of using a trust to disperse their assets.
Okay. Is there any other forms of sort of things in the, what are you snickering at?
The fly keeps landing on Tim's face.
Yeah,
when
Now
he
the
because
says
fly is
this-
bugging me.
Well, the fly's bugging you. Was that intentional?
Oh.
Well, maybe I'm about to need a...
I think there's a lot of bull coming from this side of the room. All right. So, are there any other mechanisms? We've talked about power of attorney, trust, guardianships, outside of conservatorships, that kind of fall into the same arena.
Well, the last little thing is, I would call it very light on the spectrum of all this stuff, is the representative payee status. And, primarily pertains to like government benefits, Social Security, railroad benefits, those sorts of things. All of those federally created programs allow a person to designate what they call a representative payee. And that would be, if I were a pensioner, I could designate my wife to receive my VA benefit or whatever federal benefit that is. Now, we're not talking, well, you can do it for Social Security too, as a matter of
You
fact.
can. I have it
Yeah.
a lot in the nursing homes that we work
Yeah.
with, that their residents designate somebody the representative payee. The payee receives the Social Security or the VA benefits, turns around and writes the check to the
Yeah.
nursing home. So, and that person makes no other decisions for them. They just make sure that their Social Security isn't being abused or put in the wrong place, and that their bill at the home is getting paid. So it's light.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of a single transaction sort of thing.
It's a junior varsity version.
Yeah.
JV version.
JV version.
Perfect.
It basically is. Yeah.
I mean, what I can't believe is how many people are actually under the full conservatorship. Oh God, I'm becoming Underwood right now.
I rub off on people.
You do. Oh, you do. Tim, what did you tell me? There was 1.3 million people
at any
who
given
have
time, give or take,
that are under conservatorship arrangement. Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
Not just Britney.
And 90% of them in California.
Apparently.
Yeah, and I think what was
Fake
that
news.
status?
We don't know that.
Yeah, 50
That
billion.
is not a statement of fact. Disregard the previous statement.
I think it was like 50 billion in assets are currently managed. I mean, so it's not a small thing. And there are states where there are professional conservators. I mean, it's actually an industry. It's a business, and I've not had any personal experience with those, but I've seen them, and they do exist. So yeah, it's a common thing, and I think it's only going to get more common as we move down the path through the boomer generation, and we get to that necessity of having them.
Okay. Well, what does it kind of look like to get there? I mean, let me rephrase that. What's the mechanism of how the process gets started?
Well, it starts off with a request. Someone's got to ask for it.
Can anyone do that?
They can.
I know what I'm doing tomorrow.
Yeah.
The answer is no. I will not do any of this for you.
That's right. I'll give you my Skittles collection, but that's it. Anyone can ask. And whether they're going to be successful is a whole kind of different answer to that equation. But in most cases, I would say, 99.9% of conservatorships go off exactly as they're planned to do. A close family member, a close friend, somebody who's involved in the day-to-day affairs of someone's life and sees and identifies a serious problem can then, petition to have a conservatorship established. And judges just don't jump on the bandwagon and do it. They go through a bit of a qualification process, and in Kansas, at least, the proposed ward is entitled to their own legal representation. So, and even in cases where they might not be able to necessarily afford it at the time, the court will appoint an attorney. And so, there's kind of this presumption that you're not going to be put under conservatorship until all the facts and evidence are brought in, and it's established that you need to have it. And they really, the whole point of it is to prove that you're incapacitated. And so, going back to the whole conversation about durable powers of attorney, this is where having one of those can save you a lot of grief in the future, because you can specify in your durable power of attorney who you would identify to be your conservator. And that's very probative in Kansas as your intent. And it's often followed. And so, if you don't have any of these documents, then it's up to the court to establish that the person who's applied is legitimate, that they legitimately have your best interest in mind, and that you're incapacitated to the point that you need it.
So if you're looking around and you're thinking, I really would prefer not to have my ability to make decisions tried by a court to see if I meet the test of becoming a ward of a forced conservatorship, right? There's some things you could do now, right, as it relates to setting up your trust, doing your durable powers of attorney, and maybe then you get to pick who's making those decisions and doing those things.
Exactly.
Okay, so I look around and I see you two, and I think you guys could mud wrestle over who would like to be my financial conservator or the trustee of my revocable trust. I don't know who I would pick, Tim. But
I'm not sure I disagree.
I let you make my health decisions. So like,
Yeah, Tim's mean. He'd just pull the plug.
no, Tim be like, cost benefit analysis on this. Pull the plug. Pull it.
We don't need the machine that goes
We
ping.
don't. I won't have to listen to her anymore. But like picking the right person, the right type of person, the one that like reflects you the most by doing this ahead of time. It's not going through the court, and you have some say as it relates to who's participating in your life in such a meaningful way, right?
Right.
Like, who makes a good trustee? Who makes a good conservator? I guess those many of those qualities would be the same, right?
Yeah.
Maybe we split out guardian and conservator trustee
Yeah,
when we
you
think
you
about it,
can. I mean, I
or
think it depends. That's your personal preference,
yeah,
and clearly you want somebody who's really trustworthy. I mean, you don't want to suggest somebody that you're codependent with to be
yeah.
your conservator or guardian. So,
Oh
uh,
God, I just got an image. That's horrible.
I I'm in that place where I don't know if I ask or not. PJ, do I ask what his image is, or do we just move on from that? We
PJ
just
communicates a lot
we just
non-verbally.
he says we don't need to know
Yeah.
Underwood's
I'm
image.
pretty
So.
sure he's doing a fantasy football draft right now.
Okay, so we need somebody trustworthy.
Yeah, you need somebody
keeps your best
trustworthy.
interest at heart.
Yep, and somebody who's committed, because here's the thing.
Yeah.
Like I said earlier, conservatorships can go for the long haul. And whoever is your conservator, I mean, I used to always advise people, pick somebody with a skill set that you need that's not terribly out of the age range that you need.
Don't pick a 95-year-old man to be your conservator
If
when you're
you're
45.
Right.
Yeah.
Because you're going, or you better have a really good backup, somewhere in there, because the
Yeah.
court can actually appoint a primary and a secondary, in case one becomes unable to serve. But you want this person to be with you for the long haul, and so when I say committed, that's what I mean. They need to be committed to what's going on here, because they could be taking care of your affairs for 20, 30, 40 years, and you don't want somebody who's going to just bail out a year into it and say, "Oh, I can't do this." So, yeah, that's important. And I think along with that, you've got to have somebody that's got the right skill set, and
And the temperament.
yeah, and the temperament. And the unfortunate thing with a lot of conservatorships, and this is going to sound like a criticism, and maybe it is that a lot of times family members are selected for all functions because they're family members. And,
Right.
just because you're family doesn't mean you actually know how to run finances.
Julie and I had a number of friends ask us if we would take care of their kids should something happen to them, just because they're like, I'm not going to give them to my idiot sister type of thing. But no, I mean, sometimes you just need to do what's best for you or your family or whatever it may be, even if that maybe rubs some people the wrong way.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one of the important skill sets I would say in a conservator is being able to say no
Yeah.
to certain financial situations, questions, and
Yeah.
asks, and that is not ordinary, or no, that's tax work. That isn't necessary as it relates to the care of that person,
Mhm.
Yeah.
right? And so that you want somebody who is principled and be willing to have those hard discussions and to say the
Absolutely.
things that
Yes.
aren't necessarily popular.
Exactly.
And sometimes if it is in the family circle there, sometimes some of that becomes kind of gray.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt there's been some funky happenings in conservatorships over time,
Mhm.
and things that weren't spent really for the interest of the ward. I mean, we're humans; it's going to happen,
Right.
right? So yeah, I think principled is a great word. Somebody who's not afraid to take the difficult stand when it comes down to picking your conservator or your guardian. When I said that this kind of stuff would never happen in Kansas,
Right.
when you look at the Kansas statutes and when you look at how they're laid out, they have a very clearly delineated order of preference
Mhm.
for how conservators are actually identified and selected. And so, and top on that list is, someone that was nominated by the proposed ward in their power of attorney. Okay, so if they have 5 people to choose from, and one of those is named in your power of attorney, that's going to be the first consideration.
Mhm.
And then if you don't name somebody, the second priority is going to be a natural guardian. So that could be a not in the home parent. It could be all sorts of related folks like that. But the thing that I think is really interesting and kind of comes back full circle to the Spears matter is
Mhm.
that kind of the third in that order of priority is that if you're 14 years old or older,
Mhm.
the court will give preference to who you nominate. Okay, so one of the things that Britney Spears always said was that she didn't want her dad to be her conservator. And that conservatorship was established when she was an adult. And so in whatever jurisdiction that is, clearly
That's not the rule.
that's not the rule. But in Kansas, that is the rule. And that's kind of the way it rolls. And then, from there on, they'll look to your family, so if something happened to me and Kendra said, hey, I can't handle his affairs, but Michelle can, I would nominate her. They would rely on that nomination and say, okay, that makes sense. And then where you see the forced, kind of these forced situations would be the very last on the totem pole. And that's, where the person who is nominated is also the person filing the petition. And I can tell you they're going to go through all sorts of hoops to prove that up. So we have a nice, Kansas does some things in a really decent, methodical fashion. And this is one of those situations. They've always done this in what I consider to be a very strong way.
Underwood says we're big in Germany. We've had a lot of downloads there, so we might need to take a look and see how that works. For our German listeners.
I think we're bigger in Belgium.
Okay.
It's maybe a bit into Austria.
Not anymore. We were big till Underwood did that.
Till he did that.
Till he did that.
They listen to the podcast at the discotheque. Okay, that's it for today's episode of the Trust Us, We're Professionals podcast, brought to you by all of us at SSC CPAs and Advisors. If you ever have any financial questions, you can always reach out to our website, www.ssccpas.com, or email us. Please email us with questions, podcast@ssccpas.com. Brittany, we wish you nothing but the best. This podcast was recorded and is being made available by SSC Solutions, Inc., together with its affiliates and its employees, SSC, solely for informational purposes. SSC is not providing or undertaking to provide any financial, economic, legal, accounting, tax, or any other advice in or by virtue of this podcast. The information, statements, comments, views, and opinions provided in this podcast are general in nature, and such information, statements, comments, views, and opinions in the receipt of this podcast by any listener are not intended to be and should not be construed as the provision of investment advice by SSC, that listener or generally, and do not result in any listener being considered a client or customer of SSC. The information, statements, comments, views, and opinions expressed in this podcast do not constitute and should not be construed as an offer to buy or sell any securities or to make any investment course of action. The information, statements, comments, views, and opinions expressed or provided in this podcast, including by speakers who are not officers, employees, or agents of SSC, are not necessarily those of SSC and may not be current. SSC does not make any representation or warranty as to the accuracy or completeness of any of the information, statements, comments, views, or opinions contained in this podcast, and any liability thereof, including in respect of direct, indirect, or consequential loss or damage of any kind whatsoever, is expressly disclaimed. SSC does not undertake any obligation whatsoever to provide any form of update, amendment, change, or correction to any of this information, statements, comments, views, or opinions set forth in this podcast. No part of this podcast may, without SSC Solutions Inc.'s prior written consent, be reproduced, redistributed, published, copied, or duplicated in any form by any means.